Time and again, students tell me they have heard the simple instruction, live in the end. Yet instead of peace, they feel strain. Instead of rest, they feel tension. Instead of the deep conviction of the wish fulfilled, they feel as though they are merely playing a role upon a stage, afraid the curtain might fall at any moment. They tell me they are trying to live as though it were already done, and yet they are weary. They are watching themselves. They are constantly checking for signs. They are forcing a smile where none naturally rises. And all the while, they believe this effort is a virtue, not realizing that faith never demands strain. Let us be clear. If living in the end feels exhausting, you are not living in the end at all. You are pretending. And pretense, no matter how sincere, has no creative power. It is a mask that must be held in place, maintained, and defended, for it has never been accepted as fact. I want you to observe this carefully. When something is truly yours, you do not guard it inwardly. You do not rehearse it in fear. You do not interrogate yourself throughout the day to see if the feeling is still there. Ownership does not require vigilance. It rests. Tonight, let us remove the burden you have placed upon yourself and show you the difference between truly occupying a state and merely performing a role. For one brings rest and the other brings nothing but fatigue. The greatest misunderstanding of my teaching is this, that living in the end requires emotional display. People assume the state of fulfillment must be dramatic, visible, or emotionally charged. They believe they must feel joy, excitement, or enthusiasm at all times, as though the wish fulfilled were a constant celebration. But the feeling of the wish fulfilled is not excitement, it is acceptance. It is the quiet recognition that a thing is already settled. When something is truly yours, you do not shout about it inwardly. You do not rehearse it. You do not convince yourself. You simply know it. And knowing has a very distinct tone. It is calm, final, and entirely unremarkable. I once had a woman come to me who said she had been living in the end for months, yet she felt strained and exhausted. When I asked her what she was doing throughout the day, she replied, I am trying to remember it. She believed remembrance was faith. She believed effort was persistence. In that moment, I knew exactly where she stood. She was not living in the end. She was carrying a burden, not a state. And labor, no matter how sincere, always carries fatigue. Living in the end is not a duty to remember. It is a position you occupy. You do not return to it again and again. You rest in it. And when you occupy it, the feeling is not emotional excitement, but relief. It feels ordinary. It feels natural. You wear it as you wear your own skin. Many are troubled by this because they expect fulfillment to feel special. Yet the most powerful assumptions feel almost unnoticed. They do not announce themselves. They simply govern your reaction. If you feel the need to act, to prove, or to maintain an emotion, you have not entered the end. You are still standing outside, attempting to persuade yourself that the door has been crossed. And persuasion is never possession. You may ask, how may I know if I have truly entered the state? The answer is simple, and it is found in your inner posture, not in what you imagine, but in how you relate to the thought afterward. Are you waiting for confirmation? Are you checking the world for signs? Are you defending the assumption within your own mind? Are you quietly watching yourself, hoping nothing disturbs the feeling? If so, you are not dwelling in the end. You are merely visiting it briefly, then returning to the state of want. Now, many fear this question. What if the desire comes back to mind? They believe that if the thought appears again, they must be lacking or fading. This fear itself reveals the misunderstanding. There is a vast difference between thinking of a desire and thinking from its fulfillment. When you think of something, you feel distance, you feel anticipation, you feel need. The thought leans forward, searching for completion. You are looking at the state as something separate from you, something out there. But when you think from something, the thought carries no urgency. It has no sharp edge. It feels settled. It does not ask for reassurance. You are looking through the state, viewing the world as though it were already true. The appearance of the thought does not matter. The tone with which it appears is everything. A fulfilled state does not fear its own remembrance. It does not panic when the idea returns. It meets the thought as one meets a familiar possession, without reaction. You do not leave the end because a thought arises. You leave it only when you return to wanting. And wanting is always felt as strain, justification, or inward movement towards something absent. If, when the desire returns to mind, you feel no urgency to fix, control, or repeat an act, then you are still within the state. You have not fallen out. You have simply noticed what is already yours. Entering the end is not accomplished through vain repetition. Repetition is used only until acceptance is reached. It is not a ritual to be maintained, but a means to arrive. Once you have accepted the state as real, repetition becomes unnecessary. I recall a man who continued to perform his imaginal act again and again, fearing that if he stopped, the desire might fade. He believed persistence meant repetition, not realizing that persistence is fidelity to a state, not the endless performance of an act. I told him plainly, if you had truly accepted it, you would not repeat it. For repetition born of fear is not faith, but doubt in disguise. You do not drive a nail that is already flush with the wall. To strike it again is to say, I do not believe it is secure. In the same manner, to return anxiously to an imaginal act is to confess inwardly that it has not yet been appropriated. Consider the physical act of creation. Once a child is conceived, the creative act is finished. The mother does not attempt to conceive the child again and again each day. That would be absurd. Instead, she enters a period of gestation. She does not labor to create. She simply carries. Acceptance brings rest, and rest is the sign that the seed has been planted. The soil does not ask whether the seed is working. It simply holds it. When you have accepted something as done, you do not return to it anxiously. You do not rehearse it to keep it alive. You allow it to be. You move through your day without guarding it, without checking on it, without feeling responsible for its continuation. This is what I call the Sabbath. It is not inactivity. It is the cessation of effort. It is the inner permission to stop doing, because the state has already been assumed. The moment you feel you must do something to keep it, you have confessed that it is not yet yours. And the moment you rest from effort, you have entered the end. Many ask, but Neville, how long must I live in the end? This question itself reveals the misunderstanding. Living in the end is not measured by time. It is not something you sustain, but something you return to. It is known by how naturally you do so when you have wandered. You do not need to hold the feeling for 24 hours a day. No one can hold a high note forever. To attempt to do so is to invite exhaustion. The effort to remain constantly correct is itself a confession of strain. You simply return to it as often as you wander, not with effort, but with recognition. Faithfulness does not mean emotional consistency. It means you do not betray the new assumption when circumstances appear. Circumstances are not examinations to be passed, but echoes of former states. They carry no authority unless you grant it. If sadness passes through you or doubt arises for a moment, you have not failed. A passing emotion does not dissolve a state. Only consent to the former identity does. You may feel a thing without becoming it. Others ask, what if I stop thinking about it? You do not stop thinking of it, you stop wanting it. And the difference is unmistakable. Wanting feels restless. Possession feels quiet. One reaches forward. The other rests where it is. And then comes the question of action. May I still act? Of course you will act. You will go about your days. You will work. You will speak. You will move. Life does not suspend itself because you have assumed a state. But here, I must give you a warning. Do not expect the means to be miraculous in the way of fairy tales. The ways of God are natural. When the bridge of incidents appears, it will seem so natural, so ordinary, that you may be tempted to say, it would have happened anyway. You may meet a stranger. You may read a book. An opportunity may present itself in the most ordinary way. But action will not arise from strain or contrivance. It will arise naturally as you are carried across a bridge of incidents you did not design. You will not plan the unfolding. You will recognize it only after it has taken place. You do not arrange the outcome by effort, yet you will find yourself drawn naturally into the part you must play. This drawing is not strain, it is alignment. You are not managing life to obtain the end. Life rearranges itself around the end you have already accepted. And when this is understood, the day is no longer an obstacle to faith, but the quiet means through which assumption expresses itself without effort. Consider a man who pays his bills. If he pays them while inwardly confessing lack, measuring each coin, fearing what may come next, he reinforces the old state. His action is ordinary, but his inner posture remains one of need. But if he pays them knowing they are merely shadows of a former assumption, he does not need to pretend to be wealthy, nor does he deny the act itself. He pays what is due, but in his inner speech he says, thank you. I pay this from a vast treasury. It leaves my hand, but not my will. It is nothing to me. He separates the act from the identity. He is not acting rich. He is resting from lack. But consider one who desires harmony in a relationship. They do not force themselves to feel loved. They do not rehearse scenes endlessly, fearing that if they stop imagining, the bond will fade. Instead, they rest in the quiet knowing of companionship. The silence of the room may be loud, but they simply refuse to argue with it. They lie in bed, and in their imagination, they feel the presence of the other. They say inwardly, good night, my love. I love falling asleep with you. And they sleep in that assumption. In both cases, the change is not in behavior, but in position. They are not pretending. They are occupying. And when occupation is complete, effort ceases. This is the Sabbath of which I speak. It is not idleness. It is not withdrawal from life. It is the inner cessation of striving, the end of the attempt to make something happen. Living in the end is not sustained by effort, vigilance, or emotional performance. It is sustained by rest. When you have accepted the end, you stop trying to live it. You simply live. And in that stillness, the world moves of its own accord. You recognize movement only after it has occurred. And you realize that the end has been quietly expressing itself all along. And so, having planted the seed, having rested from effort, there is nothing more to do, nothing to maintain, and nothing to protect. Now, let us go into the silence.